Welcome back, everyone, to the Lyme Summit. I'm being joined today by my friend and colleague, Dr. Tom O'Brien, who is a renowned expert on autoimmune disease, gluten, everything food sensitivity, and I think it's so relevant to anyone dealing with Lyme or really any chronic illness. So, Tom, it's just such a pleasure to have you as part of the summit.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, especially for this really important topic.
Yeah, so so many people living with Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, really any kind of chronic infection, it's not uncommon that people are experiencing some element of autoimmunity. So, it's such a tough course to navigate because there's so many potential triggers for autoimmune disease. And again, I know this is your wheelhouse. You spend so much time educating doctors and the public on autoimmunity. So let's just kind of dive in and, what do you see as really being some of the big hurdles, or maybe what are some of the big triggers of autoimmune disease?
Yeah, loss of tolerance. It's always loss of tolerance, meaning that at some point, I'm going to date myself here with Popeye commercials, and Popeye would say, I stand as much as I can stand because I can't stand no more. And then he squeezes that can of spinach that flies up in the air and he eats it, and here comes Popeye. That when your immune system can't stand the insult anymore, then it starts getting active to deal with the assault. Whatever the insult is, whatever it is, when you cross that line of tolerance, that's when it begins. And, I'm thrilled to be here today. I truly am, because some of the most frustrated and bordering on hopeless patients that I've seen over the years are chronic Lyme patients. They've tried everything. They've tried just everything. What's going to fix this? What's going to fix it? And for many, there's a paradigm shift that has not occurred. And so I'd like to take a few minutes and just talk about this paradigm shift.
Please.
That's needed. I mean, it's essential just to keep your own frame and your own sense of rationality in the midst of this craziness, because you read and you hear, this is great, you try that, it doesn't work. So the term that I like to use when people aren't getting the results that they're looking for with the efforts they're putting out, it's like when you back your car out of the driveway and you say, what's wrong with this car? It's moving, but it's not moving very well. The emergency brake. And you let go of the emergency brake, and then you can back up completely, easily. When you've got Lyme, by definition, there's an emergency brake holding back your immune system from dealing with the insult. There has to be emergency brakes, and your immune system cannot deal with the insult. The insult then accumulates, and it hits your energy. It goes into the mitochondria. You just are going down the spiral. So I'd like to just, how do I say this, dance in this concept for a few minutes, if we can, because I think it'll help people a lot. That's why I was really excited to be here today, is to talk about this, because I think this is a critically important concept that most of our doctors don't know about either, that they know, but they just don't focus on. And that is, when do you lose tolerance? When do you lose tolerance that first activates an immune response? And so it's not that you lose tolerance when a tick bites you. That's not common at all. Usually your immune system will deal with it, and it doesn't have a chance to proliferate. But for those people that the spiral starts a few weeks after a tick bite, if they could identify the bite, and they're going down, it's because the immune system was already so compromised, it couldn't deal with the problem. or every person that gets a tick bite would have these symptoms after a bite,
Right.
everyone would. It's just that there has to have been a compromised immune system that has been working so hard for so long. And so many people say, well, I felt fine beforehand. Well, that doesn't matter. By the time you don't feel fine anymore, this thing is way down the road. And I'll give you an example that doesn't relate directly in terms of symptoms, but relates directly in terms of development. That in March of 2020, a report was put out by Health and Human Services on the status in our country with Alzheimer's and the development of Alzheimer's, because they've known for a number of years this is going to bankrupt us. This one disease is going to bankrupt Medicare and Medicaid in 25 years. I think the study was, I don't remember the exact number of years, but they said this is inevitable. We just can't deal with what's going on. And they brought in experts from all over the world. They put them in a room and said, you aren't leaving until you help us figure out what to do, right? Because a number of pharmaceutical companies had already closed their Alzheimer's research departments, laid off all the scientists because they spent billions and they realized we're never going to find a cure for this. Let's allocate our resources to something that's more profitable. Because pharmaceutical companies are profit driven. We'd like to be grandiose and think that they're health driven for the well-being of society, but we won't go down that discussion right now. But they're profit driven, so they just closed the departments. And when the second or third pharmaceutical company did that, that's when Health and Human Services announced this strategy meeting. And their report says that you cross the line of tolerance very early, usually early in life, somewhere in the teens to the early 20s for most people, but you feel fine, because you got that teenage body, those teenage mitochondria that are just pounding it out, and the growth curve is on the upward trend until around 25, 28, and then it's all downhill for all of us, and the goal is not too fast downhill. That's the goal. So you start to lose tolerance because of the lifestyles that we've lived and what we've thrown in our bodies already. Then, when you lose tolerance, your immune system starts trying to protect you by going after whatever the insult is. So if it's too much sugar, you get inflammation. Every time you eat a donut, you get more inflammation. That's the activated immune system. If it's too much air pollution, we know that every child that they test now in Mexico City, every child has the biomarkers of the mechanisms that cause Alzheimer's. Every single child, because air pollution is so bad there now. When did that happen? Well, for them, it was at birth or before, in utero. But the point is, when you cross that line of tolerance, your immune system starts trying to protect you from the bad foods, the processed foods, the chemicals in the food, whatever it should be. And you feel fine. You don't feel any of that. And what this commission showed is that this goes on for 20 to 25 years of killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells. And there's no symptoms. It's non-symptomatic. But this mechanism of inflammation, excess inflammation is really good for you. Without it, we'd be dead. But excess inflammation, by definition, means you're killing off more cells than you're making. We have an entire new body every couple of years, and so you make new heart cells, you make new brain cells, you make new blood vessel cells. Every cell in our body we regenerate, except the ovaries. There's a certain number of eggs, and that's it, as far as I know. But everything else keeps regenerating. But when there's so much inflammation, it slows down this regeneration process until you cross that line. The inflammation is killing off more cells than you can make. That's called increased antibodies. That's one of the mechanisms to measure is antibodies to your thyroid, antibodies to your brain, antibodies to the collagen on your joints. It doesn't matter, what tissue. The concept is the same for all of them. When you have increased antibodies, it means it's above the normal amount, and so you're killing off more cells than you're making. Every time a doctor does a blood test for thyroid, they look, they include antibodies if they're thorough and comprehensive, and there's always a normal amount of antibodies to your thyroid. Why is it normal to have antibodies to your skin or to your brain or to your thyroid? Why is it normal? Well, Mrs. Patient, you have an entire new body every few years, and so your immune system's got to get rid of the old and damaged cells to make room for new cells. And that's antibodies. That's part of that process. So there's a normal reference range for thyroid antibodies. Depending on the lab, it's usually 34 to 39, somewhere, depending on the lab. But when you've got elevated thyroid antibodies, you're killing off more thyroid cells than you're making. And you don't feel that. But you've lost tolerance. You've lost tolerance for whatever the mechanism is that is killing off the thyroid cells. An article came out a few months ago that showed that 87% of Hashimoto's thyroid patients, the autoimmune disease, 87% of them get better on a gluten-free diet. And these are not celiacs, just regular people. But on a gluten-free diet, the thyroid antibodies start coming down because for those people, gluten is one of the gasolines on the fire causing the inflammation. But that mechanism is going on. And stay with me, I promise, this is really good information. This mechanism is going on for years. And in this Alzheimer's Advisory Council for Health and Human Services, they showed it's going on for 20 to 25 years, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, before you get into the category of having elevated antibodies to your thyroid or elevated antibodies to your brain. And at that point, when they measure, of course, and they find it, what they see is that these people, because these people are having symptoms. So, hi, Gio. My son just came in, so I'm hoping you can edit. Oh. My wife had to get a fresh diaper because he has a poopy diaper. So okay. So the elevated antibodies to brain tissue, because the inflammation's been going on for years, those elevated antibodies killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells for 20 to 25 years. Now you've got mild memory problems. Where did I park my car in the parking lot? What row is my car in? Well, I just wasn't paying attention. Where's my car? Where's the keys? Where did I put the keys to the car? Where's my phone? All of those little things in life that we think we're just too stressed about. Oh, I'm getting old. I don't remember the way I used to. Well, how old are you? I'm 38. No, that's not supposed to happen. That's a brain that's under great stress, losing brain cells, losing brain cells, losing brain cells. That this mechanism has been going on for 20 to 25 years. And eventually you start getting these symptoms. Then you have this mild cognitive impairment is the category that they entitled it. That goes on for 5 to 7 years. Then you get diagnosed with mild Alzheimer's or another dementia. And that stays for 2 to 3 years, and then it's moderate, and then it's severe. And until you get the diagnosis of mild Alzheimer's, you think you're fine, right? But all of this was going on under the surface. 20 to 25 years of mild chronic inflammation. This systemic, meaning it's in your bloodstream, so it's going through the whole body, it's systemic. This systemic inflammation is going on for years and years and years. And it is your lifestyle that causes this inflammation. It's not an immune system that's gone crazy. It's your immune system's the armed forces in your body. It's trying to protect you. We call it the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, IgA, IgG, IgE, IgM, cytokines. They're all branches of the armed forces trying to protect you. And they're silent in the background trying to protect you until there's so much damage from the mild systemic chronic inflammation over the years. There's so much damage to your tissue. Now you start getting some symptoms. And then you try to figure out, what do I take to get rid of these symptoms, right? There's nothing to take to get rid of Lyme. I'm sure you've already, if you're watching this summit, you've tried a bunch of things already. And there's some things, of course, that help reduce symptoms, of course. But if you're watching this summit, you're wanting more information. And I'm telling you, you got to go back in your history. Do I have mercury poisoning? Do I have lead toxicity? Do I have too much arsenic in my body because I gave up gluten 10 years ago and I've been eating a lot of rice? Well, rice is high in arsenic. But I've never checked, so I don't know if I'm high in arsenic or not. So your immune system has to be compromised. It has to have been working overtime for so long that it just doesn't have the gusto to deal with what you've been exposed to now. And that's a really important thing to understand. Really, really important is finding the triggers of inflammation. I'd like to stay with this concept for a moment, if I can, and talk about what they're teaching right now at Harvard Medical School. This is so important. That there is referred to as the perfect storm in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. And likely people watching this summit on Lyme disease, they've had Lyme for a while, it's chronic now. So there's a perfect storm that occurs in the development of chronic inflammatory disease. It doesn't matter which one it is. So when you understand this concept of the storm, you then have more background information to ask different questions to get an answer, because you haven't gotten the answers you need yet. You don't have the results that you want yet. So the perfect storm, there's 5 pillars in the development of chronic inflammatory disease. First is your genetics. And that is the deck of cards you were dealt. You can't do anything about that in terms of get rid of your genes. You can't do that. And some doctors say we're going to turn off genes. You can't turn off genes. You can dim down genes so they're not expressing themselves so much. See, the language, when a gene expresses itself, the body makes a protein that gene gives direction on what protein to make. Doesn't matter what gene. That's how they work, is that the genes have the blueprint to make proteins, whether it's your heart, the genes for your heart, the genes for your brain, the genes for your eyes, the color of your eyes. They're all proteins that are made by the genes. And for the gene, there's over 1,200 genes of inflammation in the body. So what we want to do with the first pillar is dim down the genes of inflammation. So everything you learn that lifestyle-wise that calms down inflammation does so by dimming down the genes. Shh, shh, don't talk so loud. Talking to your genes, telling the genes, shh, quiet down, quiet down. I mean, inflammation is good for you. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have inflammation, but excess inflammation is not good for you. So that your genes is number 1. Number 2 is environmental triggers in the 5 pillars. Now, what's an environmental trigger? There's 2 categories: the environmental triggers out there in the world, and the most common out there in the world environmental trigger is what's on the end of your fork, because you bring it inside your world. So that's one category. And then air pollution is another. And then the chemicals you put on your body is another. But then there's also the environmental triggers already inside your body, which is the heavy metals like mercury and lead and chemicals that have accumulated inside your body already. So you have to look at both. What are the external environmental triggers that are turning up my genes of inflammation right now? And what are the internal environmental triggers? You put nail polish on your 10 little fingers and 10 little toes starting at 5 years old. By the time you're 25, 30, the risk is that you've got a whole lot of phthalates in your body right now. Those are chemicals used to mold plastic. Those are the chemicals that make the nail polish hard. And they're in your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes in minute amounts. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that get into your bloodstream from nail polish is toxic to humans. There's no evidence of that because you haven't crossed the threshold with the amount you're exposed to. But this stuff accumulates in your body if your detox pathways are not working really well, and it accumulates. Now you get to the point of where it accumulates to the point of activating the genes of inflammation. You cross the threshold of how much of this stuff your body can handle. I'll give you an example of that. Chicago, 2016, 346 pregnant women in the 8th month of pregnancy. They collected their urine and they looked at 5 different phthalates, the chemicals used to mold plastic in the urine. And with the assumption, well, if it's in mom's urine, it was in mom's blood, so it's likely in baby who's developing in utero. And then they followed the offspring of those pregnancies for 7 years. And they divided the results into the pregnant women with the lowest amount, the next, the third, and the highest amount. So 4 categories. And then they followed the offspring of those pregnancies. And when the kids turned 7 years old, they did Wechsler IQ tests on them, the official IQ test. And every child whose mother was in the highest category of phthalates in urine in pregnancy, meaning likely she had accumulated over a lifetime and that she hadn't just drank a glass of plastic, that it probably accumulated for them. But every one of them in the highest category, compared to the children whose mothers were in the lowest category, everyone in the highest category, their IQ was 7 points lower, 6.7 to 7.4 points lower. It doesn't mean anything to anybody until you say, well, wait a minute, a 1 point difference in IQ is noticeable, and a 7 point difference is the difference between a child working really hard, getting straight A's, and a child working really hard, getting straight C's. This kid's working as hard as they possibly can, but they don't have a chance of hell in ever excelling because their mom was high in phthalates during pregnancy, and baby's brain developed in an environment with high phthalates. Then you just Google phthalates and neurogenesis, nerve growth. Here come the studies. At certain levels, these phthalates inhibit neurogenesis. So baby's brain doesn't develop properly in utero. That's an example of how this stuff accumulates over time. And mom's body was probably a little inflamed, but she felt fine as her immune system was trying to deal with these phthalates in her bloodstream over the first 20, 25 years of her life. So you get this. So those are the toxins, the environmental triggers inside the body that I'm referring to. So number 1 was genetics. Number 2, environmental triggers, both outside, most common is what's on the end of your fork, and inside. You have to check both. You've got to check them. There's no way around it. When you've got a disease like Lyme disease and it's not getting better, this is the only way out, as far as I know, is to figure out where are the emergency brakes that are holding back my immune system. So you have to find the emergency brakes. How are you throwing gasoline on the fire? And stop looking for the quick cure. You're not going to find it. You're just not going to find it. Nobody talks like this, and I'm getting really upset in the world now. I mean, someone got my email and they sent me a letter yesterday or an email yesterday from Switzerland. My daughter's 15 years old and she has celiac disease. And I saw a YouTube interview of you and you talked about corn could be a trigger. Well, my gastroenterologist said that's nonsense. And the nutritionist said she never heard of it and that it's okay to eat corn because there's no gluten in corn. What do I do? And it's just utter nonsense that gastroenterologists don't know this and talk about molecular mimicry and all of that. I'm not going down that path right now, but I'm just getting upset that, you know what? So I'm not going to be nice anymore. It's like, wake up. Wake up to every doctor that's watching this. Wake up. You've got to educate your patients on investigating. You've got two lines of thought that you have to do. Do your very best to help them feel better right now, to get their symptoms down. Absolutely. But then you also have to examine where's the emergency brake. Now, this drug or this nutritional protocol or this diet may release a little bit of the emergency brake and they feel better. But if I don't deal with this trigger, whatever it is, it's going to come back and haunt them somewhere else. You've got to do both. So that's number two. Environmental triggers are the fingers on the dimmer switch, number one, that turn up or down the genes. And you want to turn up the genes of anti-inflammation and turn down the genes of inflammation. An example, we've known this for many, many years. You eat 1 cup of blueberries a day for 3 years, and your brain's thinking as well as it was 13 years earlier at 1 cup of blueberries a day. Just read the science. It's because blueberries have these polyphenols in them called pterostilbenes that turn up the genes of anti-inflammation. They put the fire out. They've got a big garden hose that puts the fire out. That's what blueberries do. So anyway, that's number two. Number three of the 5 pillars in the perfect storm developing chronic inflammatory disease. Number 3 is when you've been throwing too many environmental triggers that are inflammatory down there, you kill off the good guys and you get too many bad guys in your gut. That's called dysbiosis. It means a bad gut creating inflammation. That's all it means. You got inflammation in your gut. Well, my gut feels fine. Doesn't matter how your gut feels. There's no nerves down there to feel pain. When you've got gut pain, it's a whole compensatory mechanism that's going on. Your nerves to feel pain are on the outside of your body because that's how our ancestors would get assaulted. You know, when you feel pain on the inside, it's pretty far down the road of whatever it is you're dealing with. So number 3 is too many bad guys, not enough good guys in the gut. And if there's only one thing you're going to do to get healthier, only one thing, you focus on building a healthy, diverse microbiome. That's most important, more important than anything else. Of course, you want to stop throwing gasoline on the fire, but the one thing you do, if you get a healthy, diverse microbiome, you probably will handle sugar a little bit better than other people. You probably will handle gluten a little bit better than other people, maybe, but this is the primary. So when you've got number 3, dysbiosis, the inflammation in the gut, that creates number 4, the leaky gut. And when you have the leaky gut, now these big molecules get through into the bloodstream, because when you eat food, it's not really in the body yet. It's in the tube. That your GI tract is a tube. It goes from the mouth to the other end. Like a big donut. If you were to stretch a donut out, that's your GI tract from the mouth to the other end. And you know, you look down that tube, you look down the donut, you swallow food, it's not in the bloodstream. How does it get in the bloodstream? Well, it's got to be chopped up into little pieces. That's called digestion. Think of a pearl necklace, and you have to digest that food into each pearl of the pearl necklace. And the pearls can go right through the cheesecloth that lines the inside of the gut. Cheesecloth only lets the little molecules get through. So that's got to be digested. It bounces up against the wall of the gut, but it can't get into the bloodstream because it's too big. So it's got to go further down, being digested. That's why it's 25 feet long. And digested, and then eventually it gets so small it goes right through. But when you've got a leaky gut, tears in the cheesecloth. Now these bigger molecules get through before they're supposed to get through. That's the leaky gut. Now these macromolecules of chicken or raspberry or tomato, doesn't matter what it is, they get through into the bloodstream, and your bloodstream is just a highway. You know, there's lots of traffic on the highway, but it's all going the same direction. It's just a highway. And now on the highway, you've got these big molecules that aren't supposed to be there. And your brain says, what's that? That's not raw material to make a new brain cell or new bone cell. I better fight that. Immune system, get rid of that. Okay, now your immune system makes antibodies to chicken and antibodies to tomatoes and antibodies to broccoli. It doesn't matter what it is. If it was a macromolecule that got through, your immune system trying to protect you creates chronic systemic inflammation so that you, to get rid of this stuff, but you keep eating this stuff or you keep having the bad gut, and with the tears in the cheesecloth, so more macromolecules get through every day, and you get more inflammation, and eventually the bank account of your immune system is running dry. Now you get bit by a tick, and your body can't handle it. So, well, how do I deal with the Lyme disease? You don't deal with Lyme disease. You deal with the body that's got Lyme disease. I mean, it's a big paradigm shift. But when you start thinking differently, then you start asking different questions. And when you ask different questions, now you get more rational answers. Where are the emergency brakes that are preventing my immune system from dealing with this thing? That's what you have to find out. Or I'll stop and take a breath.
Well, I think you just unpacked a boatload of information. I'm so glad you did it. I mean, I think this is what I've been preaching to my patients for years. You know, the focus so much gets targeted on the bug, but again, you know, this isn't like many other infections, you know, opportunistic. Again, I'm sure if I tested everybody in New England, the central part of the Midwest, on Lyme disease, I would probably find 70+% of people are going to have antibodies against Lyme in one of these co-infections. They don't all have Lyme disease. You know, we saw this with COVID. You know, a lot of people got COVID. Some people got a sniffle. Some people died. If we agree that the bug is relatively the same, why are we getting such profound differences in how people react to the organism? And just like you laid out, it's all this other background inflammation that's setting the stage that when you get that tick bite, when you get that infection, that's just the straw that breaks the camel's back in many cases. And, you know, I've seen this in my practice as well. People who really didn't feel like they were hypersensitive to their world, and then after they get Lyme or one of these tick-borne illnesses, now everything is so much worse. But like you said, it didn't just start with the tick bite. There was all this stuff going on, maybe from early childhood, that just builds, it builds, it builds. And at some point, you know, you've crossed that threshold where your body's just like, you know, that's enough. That's all I can handle. And, you know, we talk about the concept of a barrel in environmental medicine, right? You know, we're all born with a barrel, and some people have a huge barrel and some people have a shot glass. When it overflows, you become symptomatic. And I just, it's so important. I'm just so glad that you've talked about all of this, because again, if you're only focusing on kill, 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 you're missing so many important features that are going to get you well when you start taking stock of inflammation, toxicity, gut bugs, digestion, gut health, leaky gut. All these things are so critically important. And I think it's also important to understand, like you said, you know, this is not a quick fix. I mean, look, I've been doing this for 24 years. I've treated over 8,000 Lyme patients. I have had one patient, literally one patient, and all these people that came in had very serious symptoms, a lot of neurological symptoms, neuro-Lyme. And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be a very long road for this woman. She's in her early 30s. And, you know, I had her diet changes, gut changes. We did some herbs. She came back a month later, cured. I mean, gone. All the symptoms gone. I followed her for over 7 years. She never once had a relapse. One and done. Yeah. And that's great. And we love when that happens, but that is the exception more than the rule. I think because for so many people, you've had all these things in your life that led up to your tick bite that, you know, again, if we don't deal with all that background stuff as well, we're going to keep hitting that wall. And you're like, gosh, I'm taking the herbs, I'm taking the antibiotics. And, we see a lot of up and down in Lyme anyway. But for the people who really do well, again, it's all these other things that you just talked about.
Critically important. And before we sum it up here, I know I went on for quite a while. I wanted to share that there is one protocol that I've seen, and only one, that's not just lifestyle thing. Like, of course, you have to drink enough water, so you hydrate, so you have good bowel movements. Of course, you have to have good bowel movements. I mean, those kinds of things are basic. Every doctor focuses on that. There's one protocol I've seen that makes dramatic differences in the quality of a person's life who's dealing with a chronic inflammatory disease. And it's just dropped my jaw again and again and again. It's dropped my jaw. And for people with Lyme disease, you have to start really, really gentle and very, very easy. And it may be months before you can do what another person can do in their third or fourth time of this. It may be months before you can, but it works. I've seen it work on so many different conditions. And that is cold water immersion. The guy who has made a life out of this and has helped tens of thousands of people, his name is Wim, W-M-H-O-F. I'm not advocating his packages and buy his tanks and none of that stuff. But the cold water immersion, where you sit quietly and you center yourself first, you meditate for a few minutes, then you do a little breathing exercise to get your body integrated together, and you're in a quiet environment, and then you go into the cold water tank. And some people will do it for 15 seconds. Some people will do it for 8 minutes. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's no goal that you have to get to. But when you do this type of protocol over the months, what happens is over months, every cell in your body gets stronger. Your vascularity improves. You're no longer cold. Your thyroid's functioning better. Your brain functions better. Your muscles are stronger. Your joints are more lubricated. Your lymphatic system is flushing and detoxing better. Your liver's working better. Every tissue of the body seems to get enhanced and function better over time. It takes months to really get into it. I started doing it about 9 months ago. And I was doing it 2-3 times a week. I just took there's all kinds of things you can do. I didn't want to buy a Wim Hof tank for $7,000. That's not my world. So I bought a chest freezer. And I had a guy that makes sailboats just line the inside of it, caulk it so that it doesn't leak with a non-toxic substance. And I use a chest freezer. Just turn it on. It makes the water nice and cold. And there's a way to set it up. It's all on YouTube and all of that, how to do it. But I started off with 1 minute. And 1 minute was really hard at first. I was, just breathe, breathe, just breathe. And I got up to 5 minutes 3 times a week. And then I set it up with an ozone machine to be putting ozone in the water to detox, kill anything, so it's clean water all the time. And then the ozone machine broke. And it took me months to get the ozone machine fixed, to get the part. The part had to come from China. So I didn't do it anymore. And now I've just started again, and I'm back to 30 seconds. I said, whoa, my body said, no, that's enough. I don't have to be macho here. I don't have to grit my teeth and bear it. No, that's not what this is about. This is about, as long as you're breathing, you're staying in a parasympathetic dominant state, that's good. And when you lose that, time to get out. But it's a treatment protocol that is, once you're set up, there's no charge, and it works for years. So, and that came, and I'll share this as the last thing. My first mentor way back in 1978, Dr. George Goodhart, the founder of applied kinesiology, he would talk about hot, cold, hot. And we were talking a lot about adrenal glands back then, and that the adrenal glands get worn out. And something Dr. Goodhart said that was from Hans Selye, Professor Selye, who I coined the word stress and health back in the 1950s. And Selye showed us that a young man who dies, unfortunately, of trauma, healthy man, his adrenal glands are the size of a walnut. They sit on top of the kidneys. But a young man of the same age who unfortunately dies of a degenerative disease, his adrenal glands are the size of a peanut. That he had crossed the line of tolerance years ago, had chronic systemic inflammation, making those adrenals work harder, making them work harder, making them work harder. And he got a disease. You don't get a degenerative disease unless you're in a state of sluggish adrenals. It doesn't happen. But and so every person that has a degenerative disease, as far as I know, on autopsy, their adrenal glands are shriveled, as far as I know. So Dr. Goodhart talked about that, and he said, how do you rebuild adrenal glands? And we were all silent, just looking up and waiting for the pearls of wisdom. And he said, one cell at a time. That's the only way you rebuild the thyroid, or you rebuild your brain, or you have to create the environment inside that's for a healthier, stronger you. And you only can do that when you reduce the amount of chronic systemic inflammation that's inside of you. Then you can build a stronger, healthier you. So Dr. George would talk about hot, cold, hot. You're in the shower, turn it on as warm as you can, and just have that water beat down on your mid-back area, right above the kidneys there, nice and warm. Oh, that feels great. And then reach around behind and take a deep breath and try to stay calm and turn it all the way to cold for 5 seconds. Breathe, breathe, 3, 4, 5, and turn it back to hot again, right? So that hot, cold, hot. And you find the first time it's kind of weird to do it, but after that, you say, wow, that's kind of refreshing. That feels pretty good. Because hot opens up the blood vessels, more blood comes into the area. Cold shuts it down, hot opens it up again. So you're pumping blood and you're pumping lymphatics into that area to flush out more of the garbage that's in there and bring more nutrients in there. So that was my first introduction to cold therapy back in 1970. I've done hot, cold, hot my whole life, but now the cold water immersion is really a beautiful tool to use. And for people with Lyme whose bodies are so depleted, you have to start really small, really soft, and maybe your water is going to be at 62 degrees. It doesn't matter where you start. The goal is to get between 38 and 42 and just breathe in there for as long as you can stay calm, and then you get out. But you may start at 65 degrees, whatever, hot, cold, hot, whatever works for you. You start where you are, maintaining an oversight of staying calm, not tightening up in the midst of it. And then you say, okay, that's enough. And be kind to yourself. So that's the one therapeutic protocol I wanted to recommend in this summit, because I know there's so many experts that are talking about so many great things. Don't want to take away from any of that, but this big concept of how do I reduce the inflammation in my body is critically important. And then how do I rebuild a healthier you, right?
Well, this is why I always like talking to you, Tom. You've always got great sources of information, great ideas. And again, I like things that are relatively easy to do, inexpensive, yet they have such a profound effect on our health. In naturopathic medicine, we talk about hydrotherapy. Again, I think, the chiropractic, naturopathic, our forefathers all came from the same school of thought,
Right.
Recognizing that the body responds to, this hot, cold therapy. So it's a great tip. I know that people are going to want to connect with you. What's the best way for people to follow you and get connected with your community?
Thank you. Thank you. Our website is thedoctor.com, thedr.com. Don't spell the word doctor out, thedr.com. And we've got videos and events and handouts, and it's all there for you.
Great. Well, again, I really appreciate you joining us and being part of the summit. And I know everyone always appreciates hearing your pearls of wisdom. So thank you again for being part of the summit.
Thank you, Dr. Ingles. A real pleasure.